Today's topic is I'm a white educator. Where do I begin? And I'm going to throw this out to the two of you and whoever wants to take this on. But the question is, why do we think that this is so important for us to recognize who we are, maybe ourself, our identity? Why are those type of things important?
Dimitri, do you mind if I start?
Absolutely.
Since I'm the white educator in the room. So, and that's a real thing. One of the reasons that I find this to be so important is that I live most of my life not having conversations, not only about race, but all the different rings of culture that we can talk about, with ability, with age, with religion. I really was in a place of white privilege. And when my children would bring it up at the dinner table, wanting to talk about that or talking about food sustainability, whatever the issue was, I didn't feel like I had enough knowledge to even engage in the conversation. And so being 48 years old, when I first had my first conversation about race, it shouldn't be like that. And what I found in conversations with Dimitri and building relationships with all sorts of people is many other people are having these conversations daily at the dinner table. And I was just way behind. And so as I asked to learn more and I found out more, once you see the inequities, you can't stop seeing them. And as an educator, I saw them everywhere, especially as a coach. Once I left my own classroom and I was going into other classrooms, you know, it was everywhere. And we have a pretty, I grew up in and I worked in the same town. And it was pretty homogenous, very much so when I was growing up, and the diversity has grown a little bit over the years. But a lot of the educators in a lot of the Wisconsin towns we work in, particularly in the rural towns we work in, grew up in those towns, and they just lack exposure to diversity and diverse people and groups. So we try and model as much of that vulnerability and our own journeys in the work we do to make others feel comfortable and hopefully have that aha moment, because we all have an aha moment where we come into this work, I believe.
So I thought I heard this, but maybe I misheard this. It sounded like you said you didn't have conversations about race until your 40s. Is that what I heard?
48 to be exact.
How does that? Okay, so
for me
as a Black man, there's conversations happen all the time for me. So I'm just curious, just from your perspective, why is that the case that it wasn't until later on in life?
Right. Why and how? So there's this, I call it Midwest politeness that happens, but I really think it might be broader than the Midwest, where we just don't talk about things. So, you know, at the dinner table, if something negative happened to a family, oh, did you hear she's pregnant? Or, you know, whatever it was, you didn't talk about it. And race was one of those things we weren't supposed to talk about. That's not to say I didn't learn a lot by watching how my family growing up responded to certain things. Or I'm just thinking of like my mom, when we drive into the big city of Milwaukee, you know, would reach over and lock the door when we got into certain neighborhoods. Never said anything. We never talked about it. But those little things happened that put this unconscious bias in my head that now I'm spending time unpacking, unlearning, relearning. And so, yeah, it's all I can say is it's a world of privilege. I watched movies that had white people in. When bad stories came on the news, I turned the channel. The books I read were characters that looked like me. I taught people who looked like me with people who looked like me. And we talked about poverty, but we didn't really talk about race.
Oh wow! Okay, this is getting really good and juicy. Dimitri, I'm gonna throw it over to you because I'm curious from your take. Why do you think it's important to have a lot of self-awareness and identity?
I think it's important because you really don't know why you think, why you feel, why you behave the way you do until you take a deeper dive into figuring out who you are. Where were you? What were you exposed to as a young child growing up? Did you have friends that didn't look like you? Did you have anybody that didn't look like you as a teacher? Did you just see people that were different from you on television or in the movies? So being able to really have some deep down conversations and reflections about who you are it really teaches you, this is why I feel the same way that I do about a specific group, because society will have you feeling some kind of way about a culture or a group of people without you even understanding who you are as an individual. So what Kim and I do, we really focus on being gentle but being firm about figuring out who you are. What are some of the stereotypes and biases that you do have, and how can we now change that narrative so you are able to connect with your students, colleagues, and people that are in the community? Because for a lot of times, the work that we're doing with individuals in some of the districts, they have not been exposed to anyone because they grew up in a town, they went to college in that same town, and now they're working in that town. So when we talk about being immersed in another culture, they're like, what is that? How do we do that? So what we do, we bring diversity to them so they can do some self-exploration and figure out, you know what, I had it all wrong. Because we all have stereotypes and we all have biases, but we cannot let our first thought be our last thought. And that's what one of Dr. Shiraki Holly's famous quotes, and we live by that with the work that we do, because we got to check our filter. And I think once teachers are able to put away some of the stereotypes and biases that they may have, now they're going to be able to understand, you know what, maybe it wasn't behavior, maybe it was culture, maybe I missed the boat on that student and what they're doing. So being able to really connect with students and validate and affirm who they are compared to who you are as a teacher.